Today we meet Luca Mercatelli, a project manager at Area Science Park of Trieste in northeastern Italy. Luca, who has been with Area Science Park since 2009, is an expert in capacity building actions for the public administration, particularly in the fields of strategic energy and mobility planning. With Luca, we're going to talk about Simpla, a Horizon 2020 project providing an innovative solution for strategic energy and mobility planning with a harmonized approach in European cities. Before we get to the core of today's webinar, let's get to know a little about Area Science Park, the research institution coordinating Simpla. Area Science Park is a leading science and technology park created in 1978 in Trieste, in northeastern Italy. It's a public national research institution, supervised by the Ministry of Education, Universities and Research, and has 3 different campuses, 2 of which are on the outskirts of Trieste, and 1 is in the nearby Gorizia. Area Science Park hosts 76 research and development high-tech centers, including 8 public research bodies and 68 private companies. The sectors Area's tenant organizations specialize in are energy, environment, life sciences, new materials and digital technologies. As a public national research institution, Area Science Park deals directly with innovation management in several industrial sectors, working with the public and private sector, enterprise creation through its certified incubator innovation factory, policy development and capacity building for innovation, addressing a range of subjects from government, academia, industry and stakeholder representative organizations, and valorization and management of research results and technological platforms. So, that's Area Science Park in a nutshell. Let's now move on to the contents of today's webinar. This is the first of 6 webinars organized in the framework of Simpla project. And this is what we're going to talk about today. The Simpla solution, harmonizing strategic energy and mobility planning for increased effectiveness and efficiency in local government actions. Benefits for cities and city users. Building the Simpla methodology. Beneficiary local authorities. The harmonization process in practice, and the future of Simpla. So, let's meet Luca.
Hello everyone, and thank you for your introduction. I don't really have a lot to add about Area Science Park, except it's a big hub of initiatives where public and private subjects meet and mix for mutual benefit. And Simpla, the concept for Simpla was born in this context. Simpla falls in the line of action of innovation for the public sector through capacity building for the management of policy development. In our case, strategic energy and mobility plans. And a good planning framework is essential. It lays down the essential conditions for organizational change and technological advances. In this respect, Simpla is very close to other initiatives we are currently implementing and that we're going to have a look at right now. First and foremost, locations, low carbon transport in cruise destination cities, funded under the MED European Territorial Cooperation Programme, a capacity building action with a general layout very similar to the one used in Simpla, whereby local authorities and port authorities are guided in the development of low carbon transport plans, LCTPs, to curb negative externalities of cruise-related passenger and freight flows in port cities. Then, NOEMIX, a Horizon 2020 PDA, pre-development action, which addresses the transition to electric vehicles, supporting the optimization of public fleets and the partial substitution with electric cars using a mobility as a service logic. Thirdly, I shall mention ELENA FVG, where FVG stands for Friuli Venezia Giulia, the name of the region where Trieste is. And with ELENA, we are working with local public actors to apply jointly for funding from the European Investment Bank to support energy efficiency actions. Now, going back to Simpla, the concept for the project came from field experience gathered in the frame of previous actions that I was involved in particular Patras and BUMP, which were two projects now finished, both funded under the Intelligent Energy Europe program. Patras was a capacity building action with a double focus: the development of sustainable energy action plans and the introduction of regulations to support energy efficiency measures and production from renewables on the urban scale. BUMP, on the other hand, was a capacity building action with a single focus: the development of sustainable urban mobility plans. The expertise gathered on the field, working with local authorities, supporting technical officers in the development of plans and regulations internally to the local authority, or in their relationships with consultants appointed to help local authorities develop their plans. The experience gathered on the field, I said, was the basis for the concept underpinning the Simpla project. One of the major conclusions was that there often is great interest and enthusiasm in local authorities for innovative solutions fostering sustainability, but every department develops its own plans separately, and often effective coordination is really difficult for a number of reasons. For example, the Energy Department develops its own strategic plan, which can be, for example, a Sustainable Energy Action Plan or a Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan under the Covenant of Mayors framework. And so does the Transport and Mobility Department, developing, for example, a Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan. They typically exchange some data and information, but then proceed individually, often supported by external consultants. And the final result is that at the end of the processes, the plans are typically disaligned, more or less significantly depending on the individual local authority. Simpla acts on this, offering a structured solution to harmonize strategic energy and mobility planning independently from starting conditions, by which I mean the Simpla methodology can be applied to a local authority with an existing Sustainable Energy Action Plan and an existing Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan or equivalent plans. But the same methodology also applies in cases where a local authority has one of the plan with the other one under development, or with both plans under development.
What does Simpla actually do? Does it provide real practical solutions to needs expressed by the public administration?
Let me start answering your question by providing some background information. When we talk of planning, we are talking about looking at the future and trying to shape it, making the choices that will influence the quality of life for future generations. But what will Europe look like in the coming decades? According to Eurostat, we're going to have a growing population reaching 526 million in 2050, so plus 19 million versus 2014, with a growing urbanization and 80% of the population living in urban areas in 2050, and an aging population, whereby we will have more than 12 million people over 8 years of age in 2080, or that is like saying one person over 8 years of age every 2 in working age. Now, on the other hand, the European Union has decided to strive for very ambitious energy and environmental sustainability targets for the coming decades. For example, a progressive reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, reduced by, minus 40% by 2030, minus 60% by 2040, minus 80% by 2080, when compared to 1990 levels. Increased energy efficiency and production from renewable energy sources with 27% production and 27% savings when compared with a business as usual scenario by 2030. And then reduction of dependency on oil, whereby by 2050 we're going to try and have minus 60% carbon emissions from transport and no endothermic vehicles in urban areas, increased resilience to climate change, and more efficient, effective and sustainable mobility and transport systems. So the question really is, how do you match all this? Energy and mobility are at the core of all daily human actions. The problem is satisfying energy and mobility demands with the least possible negative externalities, that is, in a sustainable way. And when we talk of sustainability, we need to look at technical, economic, environmental and social sustainability at once. And local planning has a role to play in this. It may not be the whole solution, but a city is a lot less likely to progress towards higher standards of living without proper and ambitious planning. This is a major challenge for local authorities. In this framework, looking for large-scale cooperation, synergies and economies of scale at the local level is paramount. And a coordinated set of strategic plans is increasingly an essential precondition to go and try to get fresh resources where these are available at a European, national and regional level. Simpla offers a methodology based on coordination in planning with a multi-sectoral approach and a process where plans stay independent but are consistently harmonized. And the protagonists of all choices are always the local authorities. We thought of a circular methodology made up of the typical stages in project management. So initiation, planning, implementation, monitoring and updating, with a set of steps that you can see listed in the following chart. So let's have a look at the individual stages and steps in the circular methodology. I will just run through them very quickly and then we can go back and look at each one of them in further details later on. Now, the first stage is initiation. In it, the two steps are the collection of political commitment from political decision makers and then building the harmonization team. In both cases, the local authority expresses commitment and is prepared to get involved in terms of political support and in terms of man-hours. It should be highlighted that in case the local authority is developing one or both the strategic plans, resorting to external consultants for it, then the consultants should also be integral part of the team. The second stage is planning, which starts with a preliminary assessment of the starting conditions. What plans do we have? What plans are being developed? What are the plans, regulations and references we should be looking at? Then the involvement of stakeholders and partners, whereby we will have a planning stage and then an implementation, and then the drafting of the work plan for the harmonization process. The first stage is implementation. And here, as you can see, we listed a good number of steps. First of all, there's the development of a harmonized strategic vision, whereby political decision makers within a local authority are called to produce together a harmonized vision underpinning their strategic planning, both when it comes to planning energy and mobility. Then there's a sharing of data sets and elaboration methods. And this is very important. Typically, data are gathered separately by the energy and the mobility department within a local authority. And they are elaborated not only separately, but using different methodologies. However, being able to share and compare data and elaboration methods is a major opportunity, a major enrichment for the local authority. and it may well lead to savings and economies of scale. Then we have the harmonization of reference years and monitoring periods. Now here, and we can look at this in further detail later on, typically for a sustainable energy action plan, the reference year is chosen quite far back. Typically it's the first year for which we have full sets of data available. Whereas for the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, the reference year is very close to the year when the plan is passed, typically the year before. On the other hand, for monitoring periods, these are standardized for sustainable energy action plans, so typically it's every 2 and 4 years, whereas for sustainable urban mobility plans, you very often have simply an orientation of when the plan should be monitored. However, being able to conduct monitoring operations at the same time for energy and mobility plans allows the local authority to collect data once and together, and therefore besides the possibility to coordinate operations, this is very likely to lead to a better performance and to a reduction in costs. Then we have the harmonization of actions, whereby we mean not just harmonizing those actions, talking about transport and mobility in sustainable energy action plans with the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, but going through a whole revision of both plans, looking for all mobility-related repercussions of energy actions and the other way around. We have, of course, the monitoring of the actions themselves, and then the formal approval of the revised plans according to the harmonization process. The last stage is the monitoring of the harmonization process, updating and continuation. The idea here is that because we have a circular methodology, we need to make sure that every time one of the plans is revised, modified, enriched, enhanced, the other one follows, so that the two plans stay harmonized.
What are the advantages for the cities and for the people living in the cities?
Every city has a lot of different users. You have residents spending most of their lives in the city, commuters coming to the city to work, study, and use a range of services. And then you have visitors coming to the city for short periods of time, sometimes even for a day or less. Making a city more sustainable means adding value to the city, making it a more livable and accessible place for all city users, with less air and noise pollution, and in general terms, a better place to live, work, study, and play. And planning has a lot to do with it. Planning creates the conditions to produce electricity, for example, with less emissions and less negative externalities for the local population, use less electricity or use it in a more effective way and a more efficient way, and moving around the city with less negative impacts for the urban environment.
So, according to what you're saying, harmonizing strategic energy and mobility plans benefits a wide range of citizens and provides a specific solution to a need shared by most local authorities around Europe. How did you come up with this particular solution?
Well, first and foremost, Simpla is based on a network of national focal point. There is one in each of the 6 projects where partners are established. So there's one in Spain, one in Austria, one in Italy, one in Bulgaria, one in Croatia, and one in Romania, respectively. Together, we implemented a wide consultation process involving institutional and non-institutional actors, with overall 350 stakeholders, including local, regional, and national authorities, academy and research centers, national and local energy agencies, utilities, associations, environmental NGOs, etc. You can see there that we organized 9 focus group sessions and 9 workshops. Then their feedback was elaborated by an internal team of energy, mobility and climate change experts, and we came up with the concepts underpinning the Simpla methodology. The outputs were first the Simpla manifesto, calling local authorities to act because planning energy and mobility together makes it simpler. Then the set of guidelines to guide the harmonization process. Now, we also offered 2 additional tools. One is a set of 18 turnkey energy saving packages. These packages are actions that can be included in sustainable energy action plans and sustainable urban mobility plans. They are packages or actions that somehow put together energy-related and mobility-related actions, and they can offer solutions to enrich and enhance existing or newly developed plans. We can have a look at the 18 turnkey packages in further detail later on. We also developed an online observatory which starts from an online version of the guidelines, so providing a detailed description of every single step in the guidelines, and is enriched over time with examples of implementation and reference materials.
What kind of local authorities have you managed to involve?
Simpla's main focus is on local authorities with typically populations between 50,000 and 350,000 people. We offer them a structured and integrated capacity building package consisting of in-class training followed by a series of webinars, and this is the first of the series of 6, and then a coaching stage where we provide dedicated tailored support. All this is completed by a final international conference where we will present the best achievers, those local authorities that will have achieved the best results in the harmonization of their strategic energy and mobility plans. Going back, we selected local authorities in all the 6 involved countries with transparent procedures. This is very important because we try to select the most committed and promising local authorities. Local authorities in turn appointed senior technical officers to participate in the in-class training and then in the coaching stages. Senior technical officers typically are responsible for energy planning and implementation of energy-related actions for their local authority, and mobility planning and implementation of mobility actions for their local authority. The in-class training stage was particularly significant because we provided extensive dedicated training to explain every single step in the harmonization process. On the other hand, we achieved a lot of added value because senior technical officers coming from very different operational contexts where they work every day brought their expertise, the experiences they gathered on the ground, and this was for mutual benefit. This was a major added value. In-class training was effectively implemented, and it is now being completed by the webinars. Coaching, however, is another essential part of the Simpla process, because in the coaching stage, we are supporting local authorities in their territories to implement the harmonization process. And this is independently from the starting conditions. So if a local authority already has a strategic energy and a strategic mobility plan, that's a very good starting condition. But even if one of the two plans is under development or both plans are under development, we can still use the same harmonization methodology that was developed in the frame of Simpla.
Let's go back to the harmonization process. Can we look into the methodology in further detail?
Let's have a look in further detail to the individual stages envisaged in the harmonization process and the steps in each stage, starting from initiation. Now, here, the first step is political commitment. Political commitment is essential to conduct any process in a local authority. In our case, because very often there are different political decision makers dealing with energy matters and transport and mobility matters in the same local authority, then to have a joint political commitment from the mayor's cabinet is paramount. And this is what we have been doing to start the coaching actions in the local authorities. In Italy, for example, we've been collecting official declarations from mayor's cabinets. This is because they need to be, first of all, fully aware of what is going on in their local authority, what the Simpla methodology envisages, and the effort in terms of man-hours that is requested with the harmonization process. However, I also have to say in this respect that feedback that we are receiving from local authorities is very positive. It is very good. Political decision makers and senior officers are jointly very happy with the implementation of Simpla coaching in their territories, because they see the opportunity and the benefit from it. The second step is building the harmonization team. It is very important to stress that although Simpla focuses on the harmonization of strategic energy and mobility plans, the local authorities officers and departments that should be involved in the harmonization team may also come from different areas and sectors. For example, it is important to involve those who deal with public relations and with the media. It is important to involve those dealing with public works, the budget, and several other departments, depending on the individual context. So to have a reasonably large internal harmonization team with some core members that will be more directly and significantly involved in the harmonization process, and some other officers that may have less relevant roles to play, but still important to conduct the harmonization process properly. It is important to highlight that in all cases where external consultants are involved by the local authority in the development of or revision / monitoring of one or both plans, energy and mobility, then those consultants should also be an integral part of the harmonization team. Officers within the local authorities, consultants where applicable, and experts provided by Simpla need to work together in a coordinated manner so that their work is conducted in an effective and efficient way. Once political commitment is achieved and the harmonization team is built, new members can be added to the harmonization team also later on if required. Then the planning stage starts. The first step is a preliminary assessment of starting conditions, which does not simply involve looking at the strategic energy and mobility plan where they both exist, or let's say to look at whether one or both are being developed. But we need to look at a whole range of plans, regulations and references that may be relevant for the harmonization process. First and foremost, the spatial planning documents. Once starting conditions are assessed, then we need to look at the involvement of stakeholders and partners. Now, in those local authorities where one or both plans are being developed, then the involvement of stakeholders and partners is already part of the development of the strategic energy and mobility plan. And in those cases, it is important to insert the element of harmonization in the organization and implementation of those participatory processes. In those cases where both plans exist, then special resources in terms of human resources, but to a certain extent also financial resources, need to be made available to conduct consultation and participation with stakeholders and partners. The main difference between stakeholders and partners is that partners are those special stakeholders that provide data and information, but also cooperate in the implementation of the actions. Once these two steps are done, then we can start drafting a work plan. A work plan typically describes the steps in the harmonization process, providing a timeline, so a schedule, deadlines, allocating responsibilities and resources. An essential requirement for any work plan, and in this case this also applies, is that the work plan needs to be flexible, and as works are conducted, it needs to be updated and amended as necessary. The first stage is the implementation. Implementation starts with the development of a harmonized strategic vision. Here, political decision makers are called to act and produce a strategic vision that encompasses jointly mobility and energy-related choices. This is particularly relevant for local authorities where different deputy mayors are responsible for energy and mobility, respectively. Typically, in the local authorities I'm dealing with, I've seen that talking about developing a joint strategic vision is a great opportunity for political decision makers and senior technical officers. They like the idea where this has not been done before, and I am very confident that this will be used as standard practice also for other operations. The second step is sharing data sets and elaboration methods, and here we discovered with practice that typically the energy department collects data and uses elaboration methods as described in the Sustainable Energy Action Plan guidelines, or the Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan guidelines. And the Transport and Mobility Department does pretty much the same thing, collecting data for the development of a sustainable urban mobility plan and using the appropriate elaboration methods. But they rarely exchange data, and they nearly never compare elaboration methods. So creating a common container to store data together, and comparing those data, comparing the elaboration methods used in the different departments is a major enrichment for all parties involved. There is also another very important difference in the data gathered for the two plans. The Sustainable Energy Action Plan typically refers to statistical data only, whereas the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan uses statistical data, but then also uses a rather large set of data collected on the ground. And this makes their data more accurate and provides some interesting information that can be very relevant for all the colleagues involved. So sharing data and elaboration methods is a very important step for a local authority. Then we come to the harmonization of reference years and monitoring periods. Now here typically the difference is that for the drafting of a Sustainable Energy Action Plan, you tend to pick a reference year that is very far back, the first year for which you have full sets of data available, as requested in the methodologies provided by the Covenant of Mayor's Office. Whereas for Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, you typically use as a reference year the year before the one when the plan is passed. However, in order for us to be able to compare sets of data and scenarios, it is advisable to have sets of data and scenarios referring to the same year. So in this case, the easier solution is often to produce an updated baseline emission inventory so that data for the SUMP can be compared to the data for the SEAP. Also, when it comes to monitoring periods, Sustainable Energy Action Plans have set monitoring periods every 2 and 4 years, whereas Sustainable Urban Mobility Plans are not so clear. They very often have an orientation as to when the plan should be monitored, with some exceptions. However, monitoring the plans at the same time allows the local authority to focus energies and efforts in collecting data and elaborating them as jointly as possible, so that this is an opportunity for economies of scale and synergies between departments of the same local authority. And then comes the harmonization of actions. Now, it is important to stress that the harmonization of actions is conducted throughout the plans. I'll explain this better. We're not simply harmonizing those actions referring to transport and mobility contained in energy plans, for example, in Sustainable Energy Action Plans. But we are harmonizing the actions contained in a Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan with all the actions contained in a Sustainable Energy Action Plan and vice versa, looking at any possible repercussion on energy and on mobility, respectively, of each single action contained in the two plans. This obviously applies in the revision of existing plans and also in the development of new plans. Then obviously the monitoring of actions refers very much to coordinated monitoring of actions, as I was mentioning earlier. Then we have a formal approval. At the end of the harmonization process, the technical documents for the Sustainable Energy Action Plans and the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plans are going to be profoundly revised, enriched, enhanced, modified. The plans, for example, can have new actions added, existing actions being revised and enriched, or some actions that showed to be no longer useful or effective can be substituted. The plans then will have to go through formal approval again. And this is closely connected to the fourth and last stage, which is the monitoring, updating, and continuation of the harmonization process. The plans should be approved by the City Council jointly. And obviously this means that the whole approval bureaucratic procedure should be conducted jointly. And this is important, especially for the updating and continuation. By that I mean that every time one of the plans is revised, monitored, enhanced, enriched, the other one should be modified accordingly, so that the two plans stay harmonized and aligned also in years to come.
To the best of your knowledge, do you believe that the project will be successful? Is there a possibility that it will end up with a lot of good intentions and no real effective outcomes?
I talk to political decision makers and technical officers on a daily basis, and they see the opportunity in Simpla. The approach we are offering them responds to their need, and in actual fact they are investing in the Simpla harmonization process, first and foremost in terms of man-hours, and this is very important for local authorities. We are providing them with significant added value in terms of looking together for synergies and economies of scale, and also we created an informal network of senior technical officers working in different territorial contexts. Now, very often, one of them will have the answers somebody else is looking for, and the opportunity of being connected through the Simpla network is a great added value. So yes, I think the Simpla methodology may be improved. It will probably be enriched and enhanced with the testing we're conducting in all the territories involved in the coaching throughout Europe. But I do believe it is a great asset for local authorities. We will be able to start measuring the impacts, the effects of the Simpla harmonization process as of 2019, so in about a year from now, where we will have the results of the harmonization processes and the first real effects in the territories. But then we have a lot more to come with the replication, the dissemination of the methodology and the replication with new national focal points that we will create towards the end of the project. The new national focal points are committed organizations in new countries, so different than the 6 countries where project partners are established now, that will replicate the same sort of approach with the same methodology in their countries. And this offers significant prospects for the future of Simpla and the dissemination of our methodology.
Does the Simpla experience finish with the end of the project? Have you got anything planned for the future?
Well, definitely not. The Simpla experience does not finish with the end of the project. On the contrary, we are planning to expand the network of national focal points. So the 6 existing national focal points will continue their action, and 12 new organizations will be selected and trained to conduct the same harmonization methodology in 12 new countries. So overall, at the end of the process, we will have 18 national focal points, respectively established in 18 European countries. The national focal points will, well, first of all, are all committed to continue implementing the Simpla harmonization methodology. And they will jointly look for new funding sources at a European, national and regional level to continue with the implementation of the Simpla methodology. This, by the way, will also be an opportunity to enrich the Simpla methodology because we will have additional opportunities to test and improve the harmonization process, which means in years to come, the Simpla methodology is likely to be enhanced and enriched by on-the-field experiences.
Would you like to send a final message to the technical officers and political decision makers working for local authorities?
I think there's a lot of valuable added value in Simpla. The approach, the methodology can certainly be useful for most local authorities, guiding them in the harmonized planning of their energy and mobility. We offer a set of turnkey packages that can be ready-made elements to enrich and make their strategic plans more effective. And most of all, we will report in our website all the achievements of the project. And that will be a basis, a solid basis of knowledge, know-how and expertise gathered on the ground for any local authority looking for inspiration, looking for harmonized, more effective planning for energy and mobility, looking for economies of scale and synergies between departments within the same local authority. Look at the Simpla approach. Planning energy and mobility together, it's Simpla. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the calendar of the webinars. After this one, the first is on the 17th of April at 10:30 Central European Time with Hugo Niesing, owner and founder of Resourcefully, a consulting and management firm. Hugo will be talking about accelerating European cities' energy transition through renewable energy and clean mobility, with demonstration, upscaling and planning of smart charging and vehicle-to-grid technologies. Then on May the 8th at 10:30, Hans Jakob Mitske, the managing director of NEPAS, New Energy Performance AS, will be talking about the electric vehicle revolution, the Norway case, followed by, on the 16th of May at 10:30, Giorgia Rambelli, the coordinator of the unit International Urban Cooperation and Global Covenant of Mayors of the European Covenant of Mayors Office, talking about a practical guide for the transition from SEAP to SECAP. On May 29 at 10:30, Manuela Massi and Carlo Andriolo, respectively the project manager of the Solets project and the head of Mobility and Transport Unit in the municipality of Vicenza, will be talking about developing an action plan for sustainable mobility at a functional urban area level, last mile logistics with electric vehicles in the city of Vicenza in Italy in the frame of the Solets project. And then the last webinar of this series on the 7th of June at 15 hours, 3 in the afternoon, Smart Mobility Solutions in Antwerp, Madrid and Berlin, with 3 speakers, Marieke de Ruyck, Head of Communication and Participation Unit and in the Urban Development Department of the City of Antwerp, Sergio Fernandez Balaguer, the Coordinator of the Research Project Department at the Empresa Municipal de Transportes de Madrid, the Madrid Public Transport Company, and then Tekla Heinel, Head of Department for International Projects, B und SU Beratungs- und Servicegesellschaft, Gesellschaft Umwelt MBH, the Environment Consultancy. And in the calendar, you find a link to register for the coming webinars. Okay, so we've come to the end of this webinar. Thank you very much, everyone, for following this webinar. I'm leaving here the Simpla website, www.simpla-project.eu, and the contact email addresses simpla@ariasenspark.it and my own personal luca.mercatelli@ariasenspark.it for those of you who had any additional questions they would like to ask. Thank you very much, everyone, for following, and bye-bye.